Just gonna set this. Uh-oh. Okay, that's better. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Sikora. I am the Analytics Director for the Kaiser Permanente Northwest Region's Health Plan and Hospitals, and joining me is Delilah Moore, who is the manager of our Pharmacy Analytics team. So we are happy to be here. I see some familiar faces and a lot of new faces. We're going to spend the next hour talking about analytic careers in healthcare organizations. And we're going to use one of our more recent projects, which is using the Oregon Emergency Department Information Exchange System. We've obtained a data feed from that system, and we're using it for analytic purposes. So we will use that as our example to walk through how analysts work inside our organization. So overall, we'll open up. We'll talk a little bit about analytics in healthcare as a whole and analyst roles in healthcare organizations. And then I'll provide a brief overview of the EDIE system and what it is and what it does. We'll talk about how the analyst roles contributed to our project obtaining EDIE data. We'll talk about how we're using EDIE data for analytics inside Kaiser Permanente. And we'll end with some open Q&A, give you time to ask any questions you might want to of us. And there'll be a shameless plug for our summer hybrid course at the end of the agenda. So with that, I will let Delilah open up our conversation.
Sure. Analyst roles, is that where we're starting? Okay. I don't know if this is...
Did you
Hello?
turn it on?
Can you... Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Move this. Okay. Is that kind of on? Okay, cool. So as Brian said, my name is Delilah Moore. I am the Pharmacy Analytics Manager at Kaiser Permanente Health Plan. I've been with Kaiser for just over 7 years. I started kind of as a level 2 analyst and worked my way up to a level 3 and then a level 4, leading a team, and now I manage a group of analysts. So both Brian and myself were analysts ourselves at one point in time, so we understand kind of the nature of the work, and now we both kind of oversee and lead teams of analysts. So what is analytics? You can see there's a definition up there. The systematic use of data to discover business insights through applied analytical disciplines leading to fact-based decision-making for planning, management, measurement, and learning. So what does that really mean? Kind of how that translates for us as an analyst in healthcare. So we might be asked questions. They could be using data to come up with a descriptive analysis, so describing a certain population or a cohort of patients. How old are they? Are they mostly male? How many diabetic type 1 patients? So describing kind of the state of affairs. We might also get pulled in to do predictive analytics. We're doing more and more of that, especially after you kind of have a solid data foundation. We can kind of try and get out in front of questions so that we can be proactive and identify patients maybe that are at risk of developing a chronic condition. So that might be something that our leaders are interested in, trying to be proactive and prevent patients from getting sick. So we might use predictive analytics to do that, or prescriptive analytics. So using analytics to come up with a recommendation for a course of action for the organization. So kind of what this means in healthcare for someone in our department. We might be doing data analysis. So this might be an Excel spreadsheet. This could be joining tables in a data warehouse, pulling together different types of information, integrating data. So like we want to know who are our current members that are currently taking opioid prescriptions, and maybe they're diabetic. So we would be having to pull different information across various sources. We might be designing a metric, so taking data from its rawest state, putting some business rules around it, and then coming up with something that we can measure on a monthly or yearly basis to track progress. We might be creating reports. So my team does a lot with Tableau, doing data visualization, coming up with trend graphs, charts, showing our business partners, how I'm going to probably give a lot of pharmacy examples because that's my world, but, the cost of high specialty medications, trying to stay out in front of Okay, the trend just keeps increasing. It keeps costing more money. So we might create reporting to track that. It also could include dashboards or scorecards. That's a big part of what our team does, so pulling together a lot of different metrics into a dashboard. Business intelligence. So our team also does a lot of Cognos, self-service business intelligence, BI kind of reporting. And then, as I've said, predictive analytics. Text mining, we've had pockets of this, so, trying to mine information out of progress note or complaints database where everything is just hand-keyed in free text. So trying to put some structure around that to make some insights. So I guess we can go to the next. So really what an analyst does, we're trying to connect the people with the information. So that would be, the person out in operations that has the question, and they need data to be able to inform their decision making. So in order to do that effectively, these are kind of three of the big types of general skill sets that you need. So programming skills, that's kind of definitely a foundation, though not something that, you can learn. So if you're looking for an entry-level analytical position, you don't always necessarily have to be an expert programmer. This is something you could pick up if you have the critical thinking skills and the communication skills. But the programming, so that could be, we spend a lot of time using SQL, SAS, so writing code to grab the data that we need from a warehouse or some tables or combining spreadsheets, whatever it might be, but writing the code to kind of massage the data into a form that can be published as a report or an analysis. And then the critical thinking skills, so that's really essential. Just because you can grab data doesn't mean that that's going to help your business partner. You have to be able to be an active participant in that decision making with them. So just because you know how to be very technical and get the information, you also need to know what to do with that and how to take it from a point where, okay, it's numbers in a spreadsheet to something that, okay, well, this is actually something that's going to help me figure out what I need to do next. So it's that type of thinking skills that are critical. And then communication skills. So again, this is also very important because as an analyst, we tend to be very technical people. So being able to explain a very technical thing to someone that's not technical is really important in our field. So this slide just has a couple of examples of some of the types of questions that might get asked in healthcare, so in analytics. And our team, so we actually have quite a broad spectrum of areas in the organization that we support. So I'm with pharmacy, but we also support inpatient. We do population health reporting, financial reporting, like our continuing care services, skilled nursing facilities, hospice patients. So these are just some examples of the types of analyses that we might get pulled in to do. And I'm trying to think, yeah, and kind of on the far right, so the financial performance, this one is sort of on the cusp. At least at Kaiser, we have like dedicated financial analysts that aren't really part of our analytical team, so it's kind of a partnership. If they're looking to do something a little more sophisticated, they might come to us so that we can join the financial data with other data sources, and maybe we get pulled in to work on a business case if they're trying to build a 24-hour pharmacy, and so it's kind of a partnership. But I just wanted to call that out as a lot of organizations have financial analysts, but it's a little bit different than kind of what Brian and I in our group, what we do. Yeah, and I guess an example I just wanted to highlight for the operational efficiencies is one of the important reports for our pharmacy leaders is, we call it member experience. So this is monitoring the amount of time that it takes for a patient to pick up or to show up in the pharmacy and the amount of time they have to wait to get their prescription and walk out the door. So that's one example of an operational metric that we track to create efficiencies.
So I'm going to spend some time talking about the high level, what is the Oregon Emergency Department Information Exchange, just to set some background so we can talk about how we're using that for analytic purposes. We call EDIE we like acronyms, and EDIE is much easier to say than Emergency Department Information Exchange. So what is it? It's a real-time ED information exchange that's used across all the hospitals in Oregon and Washington. It is intended to improve communication and care coordination, so that we basically EDIE is used primarily by the ED doctors. It sends alerts of past utilization, facilities, flags if the patient as presenting has more than 5 or more ED visits in the past 12 months, for example, or 3 or more different ED visits in the past 60 days. And the notifications are intended to be used during the time when the patient is in the emergency department. It's a push technology, and it's designed to basically improve coordination of care for patients across. It may visit multiple emergency departments across our state or across the state of Washington. Complementing the EDIE system is PreManage. PreManage is a complementary product to EDIE that is primarily used by health plans, the primary care clinics, group practices, and it expands that real-time alert notifications to further upstream with the intent of basically we use it to we're able to use it for notification, for example, when a Kaiser member is admitted into an ED outside of our service area. We know that triggers a need for care coordination in the process of trying to make sure that if longer-term care is needed, that we're bringing them into our system as quickly as possible. And it's the PreManage notifications we find to be very useful for like ED navigators for our telephonic medicine center, which is where we perform all care coordination that takes place outside of our service area. So the PreManage side of EDIE, is primarily it's intended it's not used in the emergency departments itself, but it's valuable for the health plans and like I said, the clinics or more in the ambulatory setting. Why is this important? I mean, for our organization, 38% of our ED utilization occurs at non-Kaiser hospitals. So they're outside of our core hospitals in our service area. And this allows increased visibility to the fact that one of our members is in an ED, and that's typically a trigger point for care coordination needs. It's particularly valuable as well for the Medicaid, because of the Medicaid expansion we've recently experienced in the state. Kaiser is part of Health Share of Oregon, and our Medicaid line of business has extremely high ED utilization. So this is a way for us to better manage that population and try out new tactics to basically direct care to the place where it is most appropriate. And finally, we can avoid expensive ED costs. A lot of care taking place in the emergency departments don't need to take place in the emergency department, and for our system and the model of Kaiser Permanente, we can use PreManage as a way to move that care into a more appropriate setting. So what we're going to talk about briefly is like the EDIE system as a whole. It basically is like the way the system works is the hospital's patient presents to the ED, its information is entered to the EMR. There's an interface between the EMRs and the vendors called CMT that manages the EDIE system. Additionally, the health plans send membership data to the EDIE system. So we're joining the emergency department activity as the time is taking place with the health plan core membership information. What we just talked about earlier was the kind of the alerts, guidelines, the use of EDIE PreManage in point of care. What we really care about, and we're going to spend our time focusing on from an analytic perspective, is we've initiated an extract on a nightly basis of the encounter data through EDIE into our regional data warehouse. So what that means is today we have a data file of all of our ED utilization from yesterday. This is a big improvement for us because typically to get to a complete ED utilization picture, we have to wait 90 days for a claims run out because we pay external ED utilization through claims. So we've gone from a 90-day lag to a 1-day lag. So we improved our data relevancy by 89 days, which is a huge improvement. So what we're going to focus on is talk about like the process of getting the data into our organization. We'll talk about how the analyst roles contribute to that process. And then we'll talk about how we actually use this data for analytics.
So I'm going to take a couple minutes and just kind of walk through the various analytical roles that we have and kind of how they translate and how they might be working on the EDIE project. So as you can see here, we've got spelled out two analyst types. So we've got a business systems analyst and a data analyst. And really, the business system analyst is the closest to the front-end application. So they need to understand how is the end user interacting with the system. You know, what are the fields that they're entering into? Is this captured discreetly? What is the workflow? So those are the types of questions that they need to understand. And yeah, the process, the business process involved that's used to create the data. And then so on the EDIE project, they would need to be close enough to what the system was actually capturing. And then as you move down to the data analyst, this is where things get a little more technical. And so this is, you're taking the information out of your source system and doing your ETL, extract, transform, and load your data into a format that we can query it. So just because data is coming out of the system in a raw form doesn't always mean that it's easy for you to do something with or to analyze. So there's kind of that in-between role of a data analyst to get involved and work on putting together a data model. Maybe that's breaking out a raw file into different, a star schema, so that maybe we want to do some business intelligence reporting on top of it. So they're really kind of that technical data architect that's laying that data foundation so that the other analytical roles can do something with it. So that's kind of what that role was needed with EDIE, so we could translate this data that we're getting from the EDIE system into our data warehouse so that it would be easier for us to join it with other sources. You know, a health record number and, you know, maybe it's a one row per table per patient. Okay, and then so we've got some other analyst roles highlighted on this slide. So again, we are in the bottom left, the data analyst. So again, they're usually involved in most all projects because having that solid data foundation is critical to any visualization or predictive analytics you might be putting on top of it. So to the information analyst, this is really the type of analyst, and myself personally, I started as an information analyst, and I think of that role as more of a consultant. So you're kind of sitting with your business partner and maybe interviewing them, finding out, well, what really are you trying to get from this data? What is the business question? What are you trying to solve? And so being able to translate that business question into, okay, well, I can find that piece of information in this table, but in order to answer this part about, you know, who's been a member in the last 6 months, we're going to have to grab this other piece of information. So being able to translate that business question into, okay, well, how do I find that in the data, and what do I do with it? And then, again, it's the piece after you get the data, okay, well, how do I present this back to my business partner? So the information analyst kind of sits from start to end. They don't get as technical in the weeds as a data analyst that's doing the ETL and pulling the data and organizing it and architecting it, but they do have to kind of touch on all those different pieces during the process. And then we have report analysts, whose main role is really to take the data and create reporting out of it. So this could be an Excel graph. This could be a data table. This could be a Tableau visualization. It could be a Cognos BI self-serve prompted report. So really taking the requirements from your business partner and translating that into some type of reporting. And then this slide, it's a little bit hard to read. I know I didn't bring my reading glasses.
This is, the details in here we include mainly so you can, we'll deliver these slides after the fact, so if you want to understand some of the nuances of each of the 4 analyst roles, like this is a good takeaway slide.
So yeah, these really are kind of the 4 analyst roles that we have at Kaiser Permanente in our department spelled out. So again, that business systems analyst, we put that first because it's kind of closest to your system. And yeah, they've got to understand the process, workflows, be connected closely enough with your end users to ensure that there's some standard workflow in place. So it's not just a free form, oh, well, they're doing it this way, and this other team is doing it that way, and then when you try and grab the data and create a report, it's just not possible because it's not standard. So that would be kind of the role that would help ensure that there's some standard process in place. In terms of core skills, this could include process engineering, some systems configuration, so they might be making tweaks to the front end of the application to ensure that the data we get out is usable. Knowledge of business area. So this might be, in our department we have a finance we've got a business systems analyst that kind of works with our budgeting system and configures that way. So depending on what the system is, we may or may not have that type of role engaged. So examples of the work, mapping old processes to new. So maybe our old budgeting tool is going away and we have to implement a new one. So how does the data translate from how it was collected with the old system to the new one? It's not going to be probably a match exactly. So they might be documenting that and coming up with system workflow diagrams and procedures. So then we move to the data analyst, which again, I think that's probably the most technical of the roles that we have on our team. So they're organizing data into information. They might be doing the ETL, extract, transform, and load, coming up with data designs or building out data marts to make it easier for other analysts to grab the data. They're possibly building business rules into a data structure, ensuring database quality, those kinds of things. So the types of core skills for this role would be medium to expert SQL programming. So you need to be able to write code to get the data and transform it into what you need it to be from its raw form. Also skills, source and quality analysis, logical physical data models, and then usually SAS is the tool. We use Informatica as well for some of our ETL. So those are kind of the core skills for data analysts. And usually the projects they're engaged in are building out data marts. So establishing that common foundation that may or may not have the business rules baked in to the data. And then moving into the report analyst, again, this one is really focused on the presentation layer. So they're not spending their time really, they need to know how to code and to grab the data that they need, but they're not spending, they're not immersed in the technical nuances the same way that a data analyst would be. So they would possibly be creating reports, production reports. Maybe it's an ad hoc report. Maybe it's an ongoing monthly updated report that's sent out, either automated or maybe it's manually created and distributed by email. They could be creating dashboards or scorecards, Tableau visualizations, anything of that nature. And then kind of some of the core skills for this type of role, medium SQL. So again, they don't have to be a super coder, but they do need to understand how to get the data. And then knowledge of one of the tools, either Cognos, if they're going to be building out reports in Cognos on the BI kind of self-serve area, or SAS coding. SAS has some capability to do graphics and create reports. And I hate to say it, but Excel is always a big one that, as much as I'd like to say we just stick to these very elegant tools, a lot of times our end user just wants an Excel report. So that could be something that having Excel expertise is always a plus as an analyst. And then moving on to the fourth role, information analyst. As I said, this is one that I personally have. I've been an information analyst since I've been with Kaiser the last 7.5 years. And it's really kind of interpreting the information, being involved in that decision making, making sure that your business partner has the information and the data or the visualization to make the decision at hand. So some of their core products analysis, they might be collecting requirements, either formally or casually, documenting business rules, coming up with ad hoc reports. So a lot of times an information analyst might prototype something and then possibly work with a report analyst to say, okay, well, we need to do this on an ongoing basis, but this is kind of what we want it to, this is the mock-up of what we need. And so they might work with a report analyst to make it into something that's scheduled and running on in an automated way. Yes. And, okay, so core skills for information analysts, we'd say medium SQL. So this is really one where you kind of take the the question from start to finish. So it might be a smaller scale project. It's not like monumental of building out a data mart, but it might be, okay, well, this is the question, and we need to grab the data, figure out where it is, pull it together, use SAS, create an Excel report, put some visualization on top of it, and present it back. So it's, again, kind of that start to finish. And then SAS skills. SAS is probably the main tool. SAS, and then we use Oracle SQL Developer to grab data. And then statistical background. A lot of the analysts in our team have statistics background. So if we're doing, more predictive analytics or a more sophisticated, maybe we're working with our Center for Health Research and partnering to evaluate a new program that we just implemented. So we might be leveraging those kind of skills. And then I've got some examples of work listed, but if you had questions, I can tackle that at the end.
Well, so we talked about how high level, how we, focusing on the blue shaded area, how the analyst roles contribute to establishing a new data source and learning how to use a new system. So now we'll talk about EDIE and analytics for a little bit. Like for the past, I'd say about a year and a half, I've been extremely interested in finding ways to leverage the state-supported data sources inside the organization. There's a growing richness of data managed by the states in Oregon and Washington specifically, and we contribute to those data sources, but we really haven't taken advantage of those data sources for value-added purposes inside our organization. So we're trying to figure out how to do so, and I think EDIE has been our first emerging success story. And I say emerging because we've only been using the EDIE data since about fourth quarter of last year. We established our data feed in August of 2016, and it took us a while to learn the data and figure out what to do with it. So at a very high level, I kind of walk through some of the basic data aspects of what we are talking about with EDIE. So we have there's basically a patient file, which gives you the standard like name, date of birth, member ID, address, encounter file, so you get to know the date, the facility, the location, like transfer event, like how did the patient arrive, how did the patient leave, the encounter type, was it ED only, hospital service, chief complaint, chief diagnosis, other diagnosis codes, attending physician, and a deceased flag. And then finally, a historical utilization count. This is really a flag of ED count in past 6 months and inpatient count in past 6 months. So this isn't all the detail, but these 3 slides comprise the bulk of the detail of what we're talking about with the EDIE system. So the first thing we did is we had to try to validate EDIE against our existing data sources. So we looked at making sure how much data is actually in the EDIE system and how much are we still missing data, or how reliable is it? So we validated during the third quarter, and what we found is there were roughly 10,500 of encounters that we found in EDIE that were also in our existing inpatient data mart. There were about 2,900 that were only in EDIE that were not in our data mart, and these would be folks that, for various reasons, the membership status was not appropriate. And finally, there were about 3,200 that were in our KP inpatient data mart that were not in the EDIE system. And what we discovered is there are still hospitals not using EDIE. There's some small ones around the state that are not using the EDIE system. So there are a few that fall out. But by and large, the vast majority we were capturing. So it was, it's not 100%, but it's good enough to use for analytical purposes. So once we spent about a quarter learning the data, profiling the data, figuring out how we could use it. And then we came up with a couple core uses. So the first we did was an ED daily census report. Like I said earlier, is historically, to get a fully accurate ED count, it took about 90 days because we had to wait for the full claims run out to occur. And with EDIE, we have a day after data file. And actually, we're capturing 2 data files, a day after and then 1 week after, because where our theory is that some hospitals might have interface lags and whatnot. So, but what we did is we're using this to create a ED leading indicator status. Say how many Kaiser members were in the emergency department yesterday. So EDIE is being used to supplement our existing Epic Clarity data, and we're basically bringing in the encounters we're using EDIE to bring in encounters from external hospitals that we don't have a direct feed within our Clarity environment. There's a few of our core hospitals that are non-Kaiser hospitals that we actually do have those feeds. So the impact for us was near real-time visibility to total ED census across all of hospitals. And the big improvement was that reduced claim lag from 90 days to 1 day. So what does that look like? Here's kind of our simplified explanation of how we did it. So our model was the data mart layer. We use Clarity plus claims as our core in our data mart. So that still stays in place. And then we added in the EDIE layer as a new information source. And we used that combination to create the ED leading indicator. So to walk through what that looks like, let's say you have four encounters. We found encounters 1, 2, and 4 in our existing data mart layer, meaning they were in a Kaiser hospital or we had a feed. And then we found encounters 2 and 3 in EDIE as well. So we take encounters 1, 2, and 4 from our primary source, which is our Epic environment or our ADT feeds, and then we use EDIE as our supplemental source, so we captured one additional encounter. So we have a more complete picture of what's happening to our members in more real time, which is very valuable for monitoring of like monthly performance trends and basically how are we doing with is our ED utilization on forecast? Are we above forecast? Are we below forecast? I mean, it lets us basically make more accurate decisions in a more timely manner.
And just real quick, in case you didn't know, Clarity is the data warehouse behind Epic's EHR. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Second, this was a new use. This was not one of our planned uses, but it's one that we've been asked to create. So I can't tell you the impact yet because, like I said, it's brand new. It's being developed right now. But again, we're using EDIE to supplement Clarity data. The operational bounce back report is basically like people that are bouncing back to the ED. And we're again, just like the census, we're using EDIE to provide a more accurate picture. Like we had very accurate information for our 2 Kaiser emergency departments that we run because it's our system. But we're able to use what we're able to do now is supplement our Kaiser hospital data with EDIE to provide a more real-time, more accurate, more complete picture of ED bounce back. Because if like someone in theory could go to Kaiser Westside Hospital ED and then 2 days later, or even sometimes even the same day, go to St. Vincent's on the same day. And we would know about the Kaiser activity, but we wouldn't necessarily know about the St. Vincent's activity. So this provides us ability to capture both. And those bounce back reports are used by for the care coordination teams to make sure that if we see someone showing up multiple times, there's a sign of a problem and something more needs to be done. So there'll be outreach to, and then that'll trigger a series of care coordination events. This is another new source, and we're going to start using the EDIE system or the EDIE data feed for basically ED source document. So what that is like we know from claims when the day an ED visit occurred, but for outside utilization, we never knew the time of day that visit occurred. So using the EDIE system, we now know the day and the time that occurred, and what that allows us to do is it allows us to piece together the total picture of care. So if a member called us before going to the emergency department, now we know not just that a member called us on the phone, called regional advice, maybe went to urgent care and the emergency department. We know the sequence of that event. So that timestamp out of EDIE proved to be very valuable, and we weren't anticipating that. But from an analytic perspective, it allows us to piece together the series of events on the days that our members go to the emergency department, and we can use that to look for trends and spot opportunities to intervene or create better care pathways. So our goal with this is to identify upstream intervention points, and we can redirect care to more appropriate settings. It's in use right now, but it's still too soon to tell the results. So, but this is another unanticipated use of this data. And the final use of the data, and this is another new one that we just thought of about a month ago, is we're going to, and it's a new request, we actually have to get a new data file for this, but we're going to get a historical ED utilization for new KP members from the EDIE data system. So when new members are joining our organization, if there was a history of high ED utilization in the past 12 months, we know that means that there's care coordination is required or a greater level of outreach is required. So what we're going to do is use the EDIE data to proactively identify our new members that need outreach and enrollment into our care coordination program. So typically we wait for them to either start showing up in the emergency department or for them to call us on the phone to make their first appointment. And we know for a lot of members they won't do that. They will either we'll catch it after they go to the ED 3 or 4 times and say, oh, there's a problem. But a lot of that could be claims-based, so there's that very big time lag as well. So this allows us to get a more complete picture and proactively outreach to those members, which is better for their health, and it's better for their costs, it's better for our costs, it's pretty much better for everybody. So those are 4 examples, and this is I thought these were good to highlight because one is like all 4 of the analyst roles in our organization serve a purpose in creating this new value for the organization, and we're seeing some really cool results coming out of it, or new ways. We're creating new information. It's like this is information we haven't had in the organization before. So it's kind of a good example of how analysts can impact a healthcare organization. Finally, our shameless plug. Delilah, myself, Shannon will be, again, co-teaching this summer, Health Data Analytics.
Yes.
It's our hybrid course. It's sponsored jointly by Kaiser Permanente and OHSU. Basically, you get an opportunity for hands-on coding, a lot of good discussions, and we have a lot of guest speakers from Kaiser Permanente. We have leaders from 2 of our operating regions, our new Seattle region, our Portland region, and we have guests from our program office in Oakland coming up to as guest speakers already confirmed. So the on-campus portion is August 21st through 25th, and we'd love to see you.
Yeah, and the other plug we wanted to make is that we have a few open analyst positions at the moment. There's one on my team, so we have an open information analyst with pharmacy, level 3. So if anyone is interested in that, I'd be happy to chat with you after this.
Yeah, we also have, and if you searched on the Kaiser Permanente jobs board, is like these titles you see that we just used are what they show up as. But we do have like as Delilah mentioned, the pharmacy analyst. We have an analyst in utilization management, one in population health. We're recruiting for right now too, and we have our summer internships coming up soon, which I believe we have 3 graduate level internships coming up this summer, and those always typically post in the early April timeframe. So with that, we want to save some time for questions. We have about 20 minutes. We'll open the floor to hear from you. Sure.
So I noticed you're bringing in timestamp data now, and traditionally timestamp data is notoriously noisy and biased and unreliable, but I mean, I don't know about this particular case, but just in general, when you're bringing in data and new data sources, is there a particular process for sort of validating the accuracy and reliability of that data, and maybe just talk a little bit about that, especially when you're doing some new things with some new kind of data that is not something that has been previously.
Sure.
You have it incorporated in your process as well.
Yeah, so we spent about a quarter on that effort, and what we did in this situation was basically using the encountered data coming in through the EDIE system. Is like we spent a significant amount of time is like basically matching to claims to either the claims or for our internal we own 2 hospitals, so for our 2 hospitals we matched it directly back to the encounter data we have in Epic. So this was a process. I mean, it's not foolproof, but it's we were basically matching from patient member ID, last name, first name, encounter date, facility, just to understand. Like step 1 is always understand the data. So it's like, are we getting 1 record in EDIE per claim, or potentially hospitals entering transactions multiple times, and we have to create some logic to filter down. In this case, there was some dirtiness to the data coming in, so there were cases where there were multiple records, or like an update after the fact would trigger a new fire in EDIE. So we basically use that as create some I mean, it's crude right now, but it's basically logic of if it's basically the same encounter record. We take the most recent data file, and that becomes the one we use for analytic purposes. And we always basically we start out bringing everything in and don't apply any logic, and we just work with the raw data for a period of time until we understand how it's behaving, and then we'll start adding logic on after about a quarter. In this case, it took us about 3 months before we started adding any logic onto that process.
Curious if you integrated external data sources into your warehouse at all, like Fit data or Vision and that into my chart, for example.
Yeah, we have wearable devices, broad scale we have not yet, and we have pilots underway in our Southern California region. We're trying to figure out the best way to use that data. In Northwest, we have not done that yet. We do have instances where we have patient questionnaires being completed through MyChart that we are using. And we have other external data, like Delilah had a project where she used post office data for part of mail order pharmacy analysis this year. We have like our member surveys. So there's some external data sources. We're trying to, one of our goals is to try to establish more external data feeds to complement what we have internally, which we have the EDIE project right now. We are approved on a very limited basis for use of Oregon APAC data for new member onboarding, which is another very significant learning taking place right now. But as it relates to like wearables or home devices, like I think it's we're not at full scale yet, but the organization is. I think pilots are underway in our research areas.
Yeah, and I think the closest thing we have exercise as a vital sign. It's like a questionnaire, and we ask the patients, how often they're exercising. So we have at least something, but yeah, not quite there yet.
Do you license any of your generation software to other providers?
Up to this point, we have not. It's a topic of conversation quite frequently, and it's like there are instances where we have some pretty tight network integration. Like in this area, like Kaiser and the Portland Clinic work very closely together. So we've talked about it of how far we take that model for our network, our contracted network partners, but as like a commercial venture, like the organization has decided that's we don't get into those types of ventures. We're focused more on when we do release to the community, it's typically from a community benefit perspective, and it's like just released as open source to the. And we've done that frequently with research studies and some of the algorithms developed in our research organization. But as it relates to data mart design or any of like the data infrastructure, we haven't done that yet.
When you work with your stakeholders, what is a typical request and what is an atypical request?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Wow, atypical request. So something that we might just shut down and say no way.
Just something that is not frequently asked, but it's interesting.
We do get some weird ones. The worst are related to lawsuits, I would say, because something bad happened. I think a more recent one is, and it's from our community benefit, and this would be atypical, I think, but we're hoping to shift more to typical because it's part of our organization's mission is on the community benefit side, we have a program called Thriving Schools. Delilah actually created the first dashboard or series of reports for it, and the David Douglas School District was working with us, and they wanted basically population health metrics for their school district of their Kaiser population, and they're using it to go after a grant to open a community health clinic in the high school. So it's really cool use of our data outside of our walls, and kind of extending our reach into the community. But I would say that's atypical just because it's like outside it's a school district, number one. It's not a healthcare provider, and it's a kind of a unique use of our data. I think more typical would probably be like we had oodles of requests for like, I need a population of X, or how many people. We had one yesterday. I had how many Medicaid members are using our new Eugene clinic. Like we get lots and lots of those, like very like low complexity but high volume type of requests. It's just giving a count for a population count for like 3 or 4 different variables.
Yeah, I mean, for me, typical requests are around what drugs people are taking, and that usually translates to lists of patients that a pharmacist can outreach to and convert from a non-formulary to a formulary product. I mean, those are not very sophisticated. Well, they can be, actually, if the patient has allergies, and there's a lot of different data complexities with pharmacy data. But yeah, and like who's taking the most expensive medications, what providers are prescribing the drugs that we don't want them to. So those types of things, rolling things up by provider or medical office, that's very common, so that, you know, our leaders can understand, well, is there one medical office that's a poor performer and we need to get out there and work with them. So that's kind of typical stuff. And I would say it's atypical, really, when a business partner comes to us and asks for something really cool and predictive analytics or statistical. That doesn't usually happen.
That is true.
That ends up being, okay, here's the question that they're trying to address, and then they might come to us and we might say, oh, well, maybe we could use this cool technique. So they don't usually come to us and say, I've got this cool idea.
I'd say in the hospitals we get a lot around patient flow and date time stamps as well, or on the ambulatory side of access measurements, like how many times an appointment canceled before a member showed up, or did the member cancel, or did the provider cancel, or trying to understand those different types of behaviors, and anything looking for waste on that operational side is fairly common.
So, speaking of waste, your company operates in the District of Columbia. Do you do military or government contracting?
We do not have military or government contracting, but we do serve a lot of our federal employees are Kaiser members.
But you don't do work for the VA, for example?
I think there's limited referrals back and forth, but Kaiser does not participate in TRICARE. It feels like it's a losing battle sometimes. It feels like I would say we've taken the approach. I mean, whenever we build a data mart, and particularly whenever we have self-service tools on top of it, number one, we try to build a lot of safeguards into the BI tool to prevent people from doing things they shouldn't. So we build a lot of the business rules into the data layer so that the metrics are pre-calculated, or that they can't be calculated incorrectly using the self-service like analysis tools or the ad hoc query tools. A lot of our business rules as to the metric definitions calculations right now are captured in embarrassingly like Word documents, Excel, SharePoint. Our organization at an enterprise level is we have 2 efforts that are in their emerging phases right now. One is around true data governance inside the organization. So we have 12 data stewards that are at a national level starting to govern the data domains that we use. Pharmacy is going to be the first implemented effort, so Delilah will be heavily involved with that. How we relate, I mean, for us to have like 8 operating regions with 8 slightly varying definitions of all the various metrics. We have one pharmacy system, but it's not entirely used 100% the same from a workflow perspective. So how a national governance effort unfolds is yet to be seen. Maybe we can talk about that in next year's talk, because we'll learn a lot during the course of the coming year. Complementing that effort, we have inside the analytic community, we have an effort underway right now to build a single and quite robust knowledge management system for the analytic community. So a common code repository, common request management, like Analyst directory, so that we can start to integrate what analysts are completing what requests are using what code links to what data sources. As that takes hold, I think it will be immensely powerful, and it's going to become an entire new information source unto itself. So where we are today and where we could be 4 or 5 years from now, I'm hoping is a very different place, because I think we as an organization are investing systematically in those efforts right now. It's been very grassroots up until this point. Other questions? You can try to stump us. Sure. Go ahead.
Do you have any members on your team that do qualitative research on
I don't think so.
No,
That's
not
a good question.
really. I mean, I would say that type of skill set doesn't live within our group, but there might be other folks in the organization, whether it be consultants or, I'm thinking like a process improvement type expertise might be, if they're, working on a specific project, they might be getting some data from us, but then also supplementing that with a focus group interviews. But yeah, that would not generally be an analytical role, but there are other roles in our company that have some analyst skill sets, but they're just not analysts as they're fitting into these 4 roles. So yeah, it wouldn't be our team, but.
Sure. Why not?
So how do you deal with the volume of requests, and how do you prioritize requests?
That's another losing battle. Every time you add an analyst, you create about an analyst and a half worth of demand, because more and more questions are created. So I think it's we organizationally within our region, we generate about 2,500 new requests per year for information. Some of them might be a 4 to 8 hour task. Some of those are 9-month tasks. So they vary greatly. We have a dual process where the big, heavy efforts or cross-team efforts are prioritized, coordinated and prioritized like top-down. And then we have a decentralized method of prioritizing those smaller requests within the operational areas that support. So Delilah basically manages the prioritization processes for pharmacy. But when the need is requiring like pharmacy and it's Medicaid and it's external data, or it might go to one of our employer groups and needs inpatient data, so it spans many areas, those come to me, and then it goes through like the top-down process. As an organization, we are building, like I mentioned, we're building a common request management and tool that will be intended to be used by all of the analysts across Kaiser Permanente. We have about 2,800 analysts in our organization, so we have a huge analytical power inside the organization as a whole. And right now there is no coordination or prioritization across those groups, so we are implementing Jira right now as our request management tool, and that should go live. First release is going to be in about a month and a half with 4 groups, us being one of them, but the intent is that over time we're going to bring all of those groups together. So that will give us reporting and querying capabilities on top of the requests, and that will give us the ability to start to better coordinate across the whole of the organization's analytic capabilities.
And I would just add one other tidbit about the prioritization. So right now we're using a SharePoint tool to track all of our requests. Someone asks us, we enter it, we've got a running list, and then we assign people as they have the bandwidth. And then kind of that last step is every 2 weeks we have a meeting with our pharmacy leadership to say, okay, here's all the requests that came through, which one, is this one legitimate? Do you want us to spend our time on this? Should it trump these other things? So that's kind of part of the process too, is forcing them to decide, okay, how do you want to use our time? which ones are more important than the others. And sometimes, being that I'm pharmacy, maybe someone else in the organization needs a piece of something from our team, but our pharmacy leadership says, no, you don't want to waste your time doing that. It's not that. So it's unfortunate sometimes that, you want to be able to help everybody, but it doesn't always translate that way.
Well, the hour went fast. Thank you for attending. I hope you found this informative. We tried a different approach this year, so if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to hear it, either now or over email. And we'll stick around for a little bit if anyone has any questions. But
and we would have been standing if I didn't have crutches, so that's why we're standing.
Yeah, and feel free to take any extra food that's back there. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.